Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast for storytellers and movie fanatics by storytellers so we can tell better stories ourselves. I, of course, am your host, Maverick, and today we have our wonderful guest back with us again today, Philip St. Jean. Philip, thanks for being back.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah. Now, today we are going over a semi recent release. You guys have seen it all in the theaters, I'm sure, back at the end of last year. We're talking about Wonka. It was a 2023 family musical with the story and screenplay by Paul King, assisted by Simon Farnaby, and directed by Paul King. It has the well known Timothy Chalamet as Willy Wonka, Kala Lane as Noodle, Keegan Michael Key as the chief of the police, and a whole host of other cast. Some well known, some not, but as always, we're not super concerned about that. What we're really concerned about is the story. What happens in the movie? So, Philip, can you give us a quick summary? What is this movie about?
So this, like many recent releases, is a prequel, which nobody asked
Sure.
for, and it's a prequel of probably the last thing that you might expect to see, which is of Willy Wonka.
Mhm.
It's Wonka's initial foray into the world of chocolatiering. He comes to a new city. He's trying to establish himself, and the plot is essentially that he has to deal with a series of issues that come up in his story of trying to become the chocolatier that you know and love in the original Willy the Wonka stories. Willy Wonka stories. So
Willy the Wonka.
that's a really basic. We'll get into my thoughts on why that has to be the plot line that I give because it's too much to go into at the moment
Sure, sure.
for it to be concise.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So now we always use the 9 point rating system. This is to help us to figure out, is a story compelling, is it not, and generally based off of how a writer would generally approach writing this story. So if anyone's looked at the 9 point system and has any writing background, they'll notice that this is loosely based off of a beat sheet. So it is to help people keep that in mind when they're looking at these movies. But went through the system, had my own rating. Philip, what did you think of this movie? What'd you give it?
I gave it in rounded to a whole number. I gave it a
Okay.
4.
Okay. There you go. Not I forget what you gave Lord of the Rings when you were on here last, but I don't think it was very. I'm not sure if that was
It
higher or
was
lower, but
it was better than this. I lost my rating for the Lord of the Rings. I didn't
okay.
realize I had to submit it to myself, and I exited the page, so I didn't
uh
have it.
that's okay. There we go. Well, so a 4. That's like it's a little below average, not too terrible, but also pretty biting. For me, I got a 2.3. So yeah, this is one of the lowest I've had since I've started this podcast with the 9 points, and we're gonna get into why that is the case. Yeah, so let's start off talking about the main character. Now, this character Willy Wonka, he's introduced the beginning of the movie, and he has his little sonetta opener. What did you think about that opener, and how did that introduce us to this character of Wonka?
Yeah, the opener was, I'm sure, a shock to some people. This is something the movie industry's been doing lately, where they say, "Here, come watch this movie," and they show you the trailers. You come to the movie, surprise! It's a musical. You didn't know it was going to be a musical. Here you are. It's a musical. I
uh,
don't know why they would do that, but they did that in this case. The opener, other than being a kind of a surprise, is I didn't realize the movie was a musical when I started watching it. I thought it was pretty good. It's Willy
mm,
Wonka on a
yeah.
ship. His ship is quite literally coming in, so maybe the metaphor is a little on the nose for this case. But he's singing about, oh, he's got this money, he comes
Mhm.
off the ship and into the town, and you get to experience, okay, he's given a little bit of background about, like, oh, he's been on a journey, he's got this much money, oh, and he's like spending it, and oh, he's given a little away, and then like he daydreams in front of a shop and he keeps getting fined, and then he loses his last silver copper or whatever the currency
Right.
is that they use. And so I thought it did like a pretty decent job of showing, like, this is who the character is. He's poor. He's trying to do this thing. Obviously, the police are going to be an issue because there's a guy finding him for looking at the shop window, and money's going to be an issue for him. So I thought it did a pretty good job of setting up immediately, like, oh, here are going to be some problems. But Willy Wonka's like very cheery and up and at 'em, and he's giving his money to the poor and things like that. So I thought it was a pretty decent opener.
Yeah, it was interesting to me just seeing that how quickly they established who this character is, what his problems could potentially be, and all of that stuff within the span of a song. So, in regards to a quick and rapid introduction without getting too, uh, I think, bogged down in some of the details, they did well at that for sure. Did you think that that lent itself to a compelling character? What did you think of Willie as the protagonist of the story?
Yeah, overall or initially is a great question. Initially, I thought, oh, this seems like it's definitely different than the Gene Wilder adaptation of Wonka. You know, he's he's very cheerful and
Uh-huh.
he's very like happy to help, and nothing can get him down. But I think it's worth pointing out that the director, I believe, Paul King. Paul King also co-wrote and directed the Paddington movies. So I kind of got the
Okay.
impression that like, oh, this is going to be a lot like Paddington, which is very fun and light, and it's not going to be
Mhm.
like a big Roald Dahl story. It's just kind of the canvas he's using.
Right.
So that didn't bother me too much. But the character seems a little bit skin deep, at least at the very beginning. Throughout the story, you get a little bit more of like, oh, this is the real reason he's here, and he's got some purpose behind
Mhm.
why he's coming to do this chocolate store. Um, but yeah, I think it did the opening. It doesn't really explain a whole lot, but I think it does a good enough job to like get you going.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with the opening scene. It was enough that I didn't, well, like I said before, it gave a flavor for the movie. It gives you an impression of where this is going to go, and I didn't hate it. It made me go, okay, maybe this is a decent movie. We'll see what it turns out to be. As you can see from my rating, I didn't think that by the end. But one of my problems, kind of what you said at the beginning, is that he was skin deep, and his motivations as a character are something that I think really lacked. And so I want to bring in the context of the other movies, but I also want to be aware, like you said, that this is in some ways it's standalone thing. So my understanding of Willy Wonka, based off of the short research that I did, and then also understanding Roald Dahl's creation of him and the movies that have come from that, it it's supposed to be a kids story, right? It's originally written with kids in mind, but at the same time, this isn't Dr. Seuss. This is kind of a quirky individual with clearly some problems. And that you see that in the other stories where Willy Wonka is like, "Oh, a kid's gone. Okay, let's just march along and keep going. No big deal here." And so you kind of get the impression that he's really intelligent, but he's also wacko. And I guess what I was expecting when I watched this movie, which looking back was like, that's a dumb expectation of this movie, but I was expecting some sort of like happy, family friendly, somewhat Joker esque origin story. And I'm like, looking back, I'm like, I shouldn't have expected that because it's a kids movie and all that stuff. But to some degree, you see what I'm saying? There is that I was
Yeah,
expecting some degree of this guy's not fully there, and one of my problems with this movie, fundamentally, is that Timothy Chalamet, as an actor, does not play what I believe is a believable Willy Wonka. And his acting made it hard for me to think that he wasn't just acting. I thought that this was just a character he was playing, and that this wasn't a believable person playing out on the big screen. And I think the goal of the actor is to play a character that you forget that you're watching Timothy Chalamet. You're thinking, oh, I'm watching Willy Wonka, and you're thinking about the story and everything that's going on there. And I don't think he did that. And that was my big problem with the story, is that because that plays into everything else, it makes it hard for me to get buy-in later on because the character itself is not compelling as a believable character. So that was the first point. And then beyond that, going into Skin Deep, which we'll go into more, I don't think his motivations are strong. I don't think he has a lot going for him in regards to being a compelling character, and that really throws the movie into the trash because the main character is what drives the story forward. And the fact that this character got 0 points for me in my rating is like kind of a big deal because it trashes every other score that comes after it because everything flows from the main character. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think in some ways Timotei is he's he is a victim of his own success. Um,
Hmm.
he plays a lot of very dry, serious kind of roles,
Hmm.
and seeing him in like a more comedic kind of role is interesting because I was expecting like there's going to be a lot more uh, comedic like movement of his body
Uh
and
huh.
being like gangly and fun, like Gene Wilder was. I mean, also just looking at like the Gene Wilder version of the movie and then the Tim Burton version with Johnny Depp.
Uh huh.
They're both like kind of dark. They're
Yeah.
kids movies, but they're like there's kind of play on the dark side. Like Willy Wonka doesn't really love kids that much. He's like he keeps
Yeah.
some of them disappear.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
it's a little curious. So I definitely understand where you're coming from with that. I gave him a bit of a higher score because I thought, to be entirely honest, I thought there were so many other issues with the plot, and I
uh,
think he was hamstringed both by the fact that I had expectations when I heard his name. I was like, "Oh, interesting,"
hmm,
and also the fact that they literally cut the rug out from under it with this
interesting.
character of Noodle. Like, who is the actual main character of this movie? Is it Wonka, the person who the movie's named for, or is it this little girl who comes into the
Hmm.
story like partway through? And I think you could make a pretty good argument that like really the story's about her.
Interesting. Yeah. I have to think about that as we continue this review because, um, especially at the end, I think her character's pointless if it's not the main character. So it's interesting to think about that from a different perspective. Yeah, we'll get into that. That's very intriguing. And I do want to say, right, like it's not that I tried very hard to give this story some grace when it comes to certain points just because in my research my understanding is that Roald Dahl actually did not like the Wilder impression of Willy Wonka.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
so when that played out, he was actually kind of furious with the movie and was like, "This is basically not my movie or not my story." And so I think that my understanding actually is that the Johnny Depp impression is more accurate to the books than the other one. But
Hmm.
regardless, it seems like there was some sort of dispute there. So I don't want to have my impression of what I grew up watching to be the true representation of what Willy Wonka is supposed to be about. And that's why I wanted to give it some grace. But kind of like what you said with and also too, it's important to note that if you have this impression of this is who Timothy Chalamet normally plays, and then he plays a very different character, that could affect your enjoyment of the movie. And
But
I
there
want to
is.
say, that in its own right, he still is not compelling, and that's my general impression.
I would agree. I would agree. The actor, like, there are scenes where he's like supposed to be very funny. There's the one in particular I'm thinking of where he's offering her different kinds of candies.
Hmm.
And he's like, nuts, completely insane. And I was like,
Hmm.
that just was not convincing.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
and that completely takes you out of the experience. It's like, I'm looking at a guy trying to be another guy. I'm not like convinced that this is like I can't take myself out of the moment and like actually believe that I'm watching Willy Wonka right now.
right.
So yeah, no, I think there's definitely some credence to what you say there.
I want to give grace where I can on this one because it doesn't seem like there was justice given to the books originally. But yeah, I can keep going on and on about that, so I'm not going to. But let's move on to the
Yeah.
side characters. You mentioned the idea of having Noodle be a main character. Do you want to go into her more, make the case for that at least, or at least maybe talk about some of the other side characters as well?
Oh,
What are your thoughts?
I don't think there's an excuse for her existence as a character. I like I I think that she's the main character, and I don't understand why. Like
Interesting.
you because you couldn't sell tickets to a movie called Noodle. I don't understand why they made that decision for the plot. There's a lot of really confusing elements surrounding the side characters.
Hmm.
I mean, you've got Hugh Grant who's playing the Oompa Loompa, and
Hmm.
I gotta believe that every single second that Hugh Grant was on screen in the actual movie, they put into the trailer. Like,
Yeah.
they made me think
Yeah.
this was gonna be like a buddy comedy, Willy Wonka and an Oompa Loompa played by Hugh Grant. Oh, come
Yeah.
on, that's gonna be hilarious.
Yeah.
That's gonna be a great time. And that's what I was like, I kinda walked in expecting, and it turns out that, like, Hugh Grant shows up, like, 45 minutes into the movie, and he's
Yeah.
there, like, 3 times for the rest of the movie, and
Hmm.
it's just so Hugh Grant as a side character, the Oompa Loompa, funny, like, uh, you've got to introduce the Oompa Loompa somehow if it's going to be
Hmm.
like a Willy Wonka story. And I really liked his character. Like, they have kind of this silly reason that he's coming after Willy Wonka and he's getting these chocolates.
Uh-huh.
And it's an Oompa Loompa. He doesn't have to have like the most compelling storyline
Sure.
of the movie, but the other side characters, utterly confused. Like,
Uh-huh.
Noodle is this girl that is in this inn. She like belongs to the innkeeper and this other guy. And the
Hmm.
innkeeper and I can't remember the guy's name, the guy that looks like a mastiff. He is
Yeah.
they,
Yeah. Yeah.
they are like, why are they there?
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
don't really get it. They have him come in and he's got this. I mean, we'll talk about this in a second when, when we're talking about, oh, where's the tension? What are the
Hmm.
problems he's coming up against?
Hmm.
He's got this chocolate cartel that he's
Right.
coming up against.
Yeah.
And you immediately set up like a very compelling, like, especially for a kids movie, kind of like this guy does it for the love of the game. He does it for the
Mhm.
love of chocolate. These guys are doing it because they're greedy and they're crony
Right.
capitalists who are bribing the police and their corruptive
Right.
presence, and they're keeping chocolate prices high so people can't get chocolate. And that is a perfectly good tension. That's a perfectly
Hmm.
good obstacle for him to overcome. No,
Hmm.
it's not enough for them. They're like, you know what? He's broke, and we're gonna make this ridiculously circuitous kind of secondary villainy plot where he's like he doesn't know how to read and he signs this paper without like
Hmm.
questioning it, and then oops, now he's kidnapped and like he's basically a serf for
Right.
these people.
Right.
And it's like that's how you get introduced to every other side character. And I
Hmm.
immediately go, I don't. Why am I here? What is going on? Like,
Uh-huh.
none of these characters have compelling stories. The reason we're here doesn't make any sense. I don't want
Hmm.
to. I don't want to deal with any of these people or this story. Please take me out of here. Let's do something else.
Yeah.
That's kind of my reaction.
Yeah. That's so funny that you bring that up because I recalled having that same sentiment when I was watching that scene. Um, and I'm gonna go a little bit ahead just to discuss that because it's the it's the setting of the universe, and I'm not sure if this is something that um I actually gave it points for at the end. Normally, this is way at the end, but I'm going to bring it up here because I think it's relevant to this talking point. And it's like, is the setting believable? I think, and I had to think a long time about this, but this stems from the universe itself. Where how can you have these ridiculous contracts where somebody can be indentured into servitude after a night's stay? That's insane, right? Especially from American standards. That's so stupid. But at the same time, the universe that we're setting is a universe where it's like, how does Willy Wonka create this chocolate? Is it science? Is it magic? Is it a combination of both? Is it fantastical? Is it logical? We don't really know. And the thing apparently is that Road Doll like made it that way. We really don't know how this is all created. And so when they take this element and play it like full on when he's got these contraptions that look like they're alchemy, and it looks like he's also got a magic hat that's bottomless, like Mary Poppins. It's all this stuff that goes, okay, is this magical? Is this science? They never explain it. They never attempt to explain it, and that kind of is in line with the book that it's all based off of.
Right.
So there's a sense in which it's like, okay, in regards to the intent of the universe that is created, there's a lot of mystery here, and that's intentional. And that kind of just plays further into that, where it's like, okay, well, we have a world where you can have illogical contracts that indenture people after a single night. That's so, in my mind, like that's just dumb. But then
Yep.
I
No,
feel
it's
like
it's really
sure. Let me just finish my thought, and then I'll keep you going.
yeah. No, go
Um,
ahead.
I feel like if I buy the initial universe, which is we don't know if it's magic, we don't know if it's science, we don't know how this world is created, then in some ways I also have to buy that that this character can just be indentured into servitude after a night stay. And like it's just part of the world that they've created. And I hate it, and I don't have a reason not. I guess more or less I couldn't take points away from it because of that. But I personally despised that part. But go ahead, go ahead.
I
You
took
have thoughts.
I had the same thought process, but I diverged as to whether or not I could take points from them. I thought I could absolutely take points from them
You guys are going down.
because it was I think I wrote literally like it's the story is at odds with itself. Like you've got this whimsical kind of setting, and I didn't really do much research on Roald Dahl or what his worlds were like. I
Sure,
was
sure.
basing this a lot off of this is my experience watching this. My expectation was a Paddington-esque kind of tale,
Mhm.
and maybe I'm being a little too harsh with them to be like, you've got all this like magic and whimsy and all this stuff going on, and then you're like, oh, but the moral of the story is read the whole contract, kids. Like, where did that come from?
Uh-huh.
Like
Yeah.
it's I thought given the fact that you had like greed as like a very clear villain
Mhm.
versus like love and access to candy is kind of the
Uh-huh.
goodness of the
Uh-huh.
story. I thought it was really bizarre to throw this other element in there. It was like, let me just I have a
Yeah.
problem with lawyers, and it's like, what are we
Uh-huh.
serious here?
Uh-huh.
So I gave them I didn't give them I didn't give them nothing for this, but I did take
Nice.
points off because I thought that I was like, I don't understand what's going on here, guys.
Uh-huh.
So it's funny to hear you say that because I had kind of the same thought
Yeah.
process, but divergent upon whether or not we would take points for it.
Yeah. And that's fair. I mean, I think and as for anyone who's listening to this podcast, the purpose of there's almost a certain degree in which I don't I do care what people come out with as their ratings, but not to a certain degree I don't, because the intent is that this is formatted to make you think about how could this story have been told better. And so whatever conclusions you come to is important insofar as then you take away how to tell stories better yourself. So for you listening, we both came to very different conclusions based off the same thing, but we both came away with the general idea of if this had been done better, this is how we could have done it. And I
Right.
think that that's the important point. The What did you think of the motives of the protagonist? I know you mentioned briefly that you thought that as the story develops, it gets a little better. Is that
Yeah.
have to do with the motive, or what was that?
So for me, part of the motive for part of the motive for the story was it's a kid's story, and
Mhm.
the motive doesn't have to be anything super deep, at least as far as I'm concerned. Uh, I thought it was kind of you have this mother and child, and you've got his mom made chocolate, and he's kind of pursuing this ultimate dream of like reconnecting with his mother. Really, is what's
Mhm.
going on, and it's you get this little sense of loss, and you get this moment of kind of oh Willie, he's like deeply hurt by the loss of his mother and growing up alone essentially,
Yeah.
and it kind of gives some explanation of like where he's coming from and what he's doing. So I thought as far as his initial motive for coming to the town and becoming a chocolatier, it made a lot
Mhm.
of sense.
Yeah.
There are worse motives out there than, my mother instilled a love of chocolate making in me, and this is how I reconnect with her. And I told her, one day, this is how, I'm gonna do this. And I like have this belief that I will connect with her on another level if I can
Hmm.
create this chocolate shop. So
Hmm.
I thought that's not a terrible one. That motivation's not too bad. Um, and it kind of pissed me off again that you have to add this like whole kidnapping element to it to be like, well, no, it's not enough that he wants to do this and that like his livelihood is dependent on it. It's he was kidnapped and now he's a slave, and unless he is able to sell enough chocolate, he's going to be a slave for the rest of his life, cleaning clothes.
Hmm.
And so for me, it was like I felt like I felt like they had somebody come in and just didn't like anything that they did and just like ran a line through the entire script with
Hmm.
this addition. So yeah, that is my thoughts on his motivations. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me. I love the thought process on that. On that. Let me. Normally, I would go step by step, but I'm gonna string out my second problem with the story outside of Timothy, and then I want to get your responses to that because I think that it plays fully into his motivations, and that is that I agree with you that the motivation of the mother is actually not a bad motive. I think it's a very good start to the story. That's why he's trying to do that, and in some ways, it actually plays more into the, or at least my impression of the story is that it plays more into the Rodal impression of Willy Wonka in this part of the story, because my impression of it is that he literally thinks that if he creates a chocolate factory, his mother will reappear. Like it literally will happen. And it's like that's insane, that's really dumb, but that's part of him being this kind of off guy. And I think if Timothy Chalamet had played a more compelling version of him, that actually would have been a very
Mhm.
compelling aspect of the story, is that there's this insane man who has this insane dream, and he's getting other people to go along with him because it's not completely pointless, but his motive is very much off. So, and then it plays well into that part where she doesn't show up and he goes, "Oh man, this was all for nothing," and he despairs. And that whole scene was actually probably the best scene of the whole story, where he loses everything. The chocolate factory burns down. He's at a loss for what to do. Then he's offered all this money to let all of his friends go away free, and he's simply sent off to who knows where to live out the rest of his days away from chocolate. And for him, that was the, I will sacrifice everything for this because I have nothing left to gain here anyways. I tried and I failed. And that was him accepting that. So that arc and that scene that it was leading up to was very good. The problem I have is that every other scene, and I don't mean just like, oh, every other scene as in a couple scenes, like every literally every other scene, either one, the bad thing doesn't actually happen like they say, or two, if it does, our main character doesn't really care. Like the point of emotional stakes and terrible situations is that it hits our main character and they go, "Oh no, I don't know what to happen, like what to do next." And Timothy Chalamet's Wonka gets thrown down into a ditch of a situation where he goes, "Okay, now you have to clean clothes for the rest of your life." And he goes, "Oh, let's just build a little contraption and put the dog on it and I can just slip away and it's no problem." And so the scenario that he deals with isn't one that actually causes obstacles. It's a simple open shut door situation that he resolves rather easily. And a lot of the situations with needing the milk for the giraffe or the situations with the police officer, for the most part, are pretty easily resolved all the way until that situation of despair. And I mean, I would even say that the climax has the same problem. But um, the point being is that if the main character, the one that we're truly invested in to see what happens to them, doesn't care that this bad thing is happening to them, then why, as we, as the audience, why should we care what happens to
Yeah, that's really I think that's really fair. Because I thought the same thing about the death part, which was not the death part, the seeing his mother again.
Mhm.
I was like, this is kind of weird. Like he seems to be saying literally, "Oh, I know it's a little weird, but I believe my mother will actually physically be there." That
Uh-huh.
was the impression I got too. And I was like, I'm being a little hard on him. They probably mean like in spirit but the fact that
Mhm.
like Anna also got that impression, and you're
Mhm.
saying the same thing makes me think that like no, yeah, either that needed to be played differently or they needed to choose different words.
Mhm.
So, and that does kind of lead into now. I like the fact that this podcast is kind of like what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at how we would change things in the story, and
Mhm.
like if we could do a better job, what would that job look like? And
Right.
to me, I think that the stakes, like you get this guy who's thrown into this kidnapping situation after stakes have already been introduced,
Mhm.
and it's like, oh, you get this on top of it, and then it just seems like they kind of like bat them all aside. It doesn't matter, like they didn't concentrate on one set of stakes.
Mhm.
So instead you've got Willy Wonka wants to start a chocolate factory. There's this obstacle.
Mhm.
It's the crony capitalist chocolatiers who created a cartel in the town who won't let him enter, who are bribing the police to prevent him from being there. That's a very good story. That's
Yeah.
relatable. It
Yeah.
happens. It's perfectly good. Why
Yeah.
wouldn't you leave it at that? But
Mhm.
instead, they throw this other element in, which is, oh, now he's kidnapped. And then on top of that, they throw in additional stakes, which are, okay, now it's not just that he wants to get out of, now it's not just that he needs to start a chocolate factory. It's
Mhm.
that he needs to get all these people out of indentured servitude, like,
Mhm.
and himself. And so it adds like another layer, and it's really confusing why they chose to do that. I don't understand. I think that it could have made a very good story without doing that and just having concentrated on doing a better job making the stakes more compelling and concentrating
Mhm.
on the core of the story, which would have been Wonka. I think like
Mhm.
Noodle as a character, I think they could have kept her, but they
Mhm.
could have gone a little bit more into, okay, like Wonka was an orphan after his mother died. This girl's an
Mhm.
orphan. He misses his mother. She misses her mother. Now they've
Mhm.
got this kind of they've got this simpatico between the two of them that they know and like one another, and they want to succeed and they want to get out of their situation, but you didn't need to make the stakes for her any higher than she's an orphan and
Right.
she has never experienced a good life, and Wonka's basically offering to pull her out of it. Like,
Uh-huh.
that's perfectly good.
Yeah.
And you can have her be his foil throughout the story if you really want to do that. I personally would
Mhm.
have taken Hugh Grant over Noodle as the foil to Wonka. I think that would have
Uh-huh.
made for a much better story. But
Yeah.
like I think I agree that if it had been played differently and I had seen him kind of, been crazy, which is why
Mhm.
none of these situations are phasing him at first, and then to see everything collapse and his ultimate dream like dissolve in front of his eyes because he opened
Mhm.
the shop and he doesn't see his mother, and he's just like whatever, and
Right.
he basically loses all motivation, and then having that be like the bottom of the movie where he has to come back from that. I think that would have
Mhm.
been a great dip before the climax of the movie. I think that would have been a good ending.
Yeah.
Like to just
Yeah. And
yeah.
I think it's interesting that you say that because I initially my initial reaction to what you were saying was, well, they could still keep the as terrible as I think that that scene is with Snufferbutt or whatever her name is. That's the person who's leading the where he's staying. Why can't I think of what a inn is called?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, right.
whatever her name is. Like, even though I could have done with not having that, I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, well, if he had had some sort of at least emotional response that about how this affected him, or some sort of tie-in for his motivations to show that he actually cared about what was happening in this scenario, maybe this would be reasonable. And that was my initial thought. But as you explained yourself further, it did make me think about, well, this is you want the story to be compelling, right? So how can we tell the story as compellingly as possible? And the fact of both making that making him more motivated to be involved in that section, having all the side characters that they introduce in that section be compelling as well, because frankly they're not compelling side characters. They don't have any reason to be there other than, oh, we can get out of indentured servitude and we
Yeah,
want to live and sell chocolate, and there's no real motive for them to be there. So this whole thing is really a farce of a side quest that they go on to simply go on. And um that would have, like you said, one, been good to develop the main character more, and two, I think it would have provided that option to show that maybe mild slip into insanity, right? And going back to the Joker, which I know this is not the Joker, this is not the kids' version of the Joker, but and we haven't reviewed that on this podcast yet, but one of the things that I appreciate about the Joker, other people do not like that movie, by the way. I know a lot of people do not like the Joker movie. I did. And one of the reasons I did is because it very naturally showed the slip from being a normal guy with problems to devolving into this terrible individual. And I was expecting some degree of this guy who's a happy-go-lucky guy who wants to see an optimistic future slowly go maybe callous toward the children that he's supposedly a part of and wants to see the future of work out well, right? Or something along those lines, right? See him slowly devolve into this character that is about building his empire, or um, maybe working with the Oompa Loompas, or whatever his motivation is, right? Or his revenge toward his father, like they show in the other Willy Wonka movies. Um, all of these things were compelling options they could have gone with to develop the character further, and I just don't see any action toward that. And they could have cut that
yeah.
whole side quest and added that in and really made that more compelling and focused on the key things. So I think that that was a really good call out, and I hadn't even thought about that. Partially because I was probably just super annoyed at this movie in general. So I have to think long and hard about what I actually think is good or not.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was tough to watch. It because you if you take the introduction
Mhm.
and then you literally if you just take every scene, if you made it like a 20-minute movie and you took out every single scene at the wash at the inn
Mhm.
and with Noodle, the
Mhm.
movie would be the exact same thing. Like you get the same for the main character, the movie
Yeah.
would be the exact same thing.
Yeah.
The only difference that Noodle makes and the only character development that Wonka has
Mhm.
is he learns how to read.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Oh.
That is it. And my wife, who is a teacher, said, "No way. It takes so much longer to teach somebody to read than that. That's bull." And I was like, that wasn't. I have so many other issues with this movie. That was not the one I was going to
Uh-huh.
choose. But like,
Uh-huh.
fair enough. So
For the record, Anna, I like your 2 cents.
yeah.
Well, we're gonna move on because I don't want to beat that horse too much. Is there any revelations in this movie and the ending? Did you think the ending gave you that surprise twist you were looking for?
Just
The instant mind blown.
yeah, my mind was blown. It turns out Noodle's father was somebody important. Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah,
You know, it's you've got this character who has, frankly, a kind of creepy relationship with this older man, and
yeah.
she's she's semi-important to the plot, and the story seems to continually revolve around her. And it gets more and more
Hmm.
confusing as the movie goes on until the end. It's like the big revelation. It's about her. It's not.
Hmm.
It's not about Wonka. It's not about like him finally discovering that like love is the ingredient of his mother's chocolate bars and that's what makes
Hmm.
the world go round. Like
Right.
you know, that's cliche and kind of dumb, but like it's a kids movie. I could have swallowed that.
Sure,
But
sure.
like the big revelation of the movie being, oh, guess what? Your uncle is Slugworth and he's the head of this chocolate cartel and he's
Right.
evil and he gave you up for adoption and all this stuff. And it's like I was sitting there going, where's Hugh Grant? I, that's what I
I want
want.
Hugh.
Where is he? And luckily, moments after that ridiculous bombshell dropped,
Uh-huh.
he comes in for
Uh-huh.
20 seconds. But it's just I did not understand it. I was confused as to why they think I would care. about
Uh-huh.
this. Like, if you want to have her and her mother reunite at the end of the movie, that's fine. That's a nice little ending for her. But like
Sure.
to have that, like, this is the climax of the movie. This is the climax, and it's about
Mhm.
her.
Mhm.
Wonka just happens to be in the room.
Mhm.
Like, that's so that really pissed me off. I was like, what am I watching?
Yeah. Well, and I think the key is what you said in the middle of that, and that is that so what? And that's something that I think anyone who's looking at a story, you have to ask that question. And that was one of the problems I had with the quote unquote big revelation in Dune 2, which was the one about Baron Vladimir Harkonnen being the father to Lady Jessica, right? And in that scenario, it's like, wow, this is crazy. And then you go, okay, so that happened. What is the outcome of that? What does that mean? And at the end of the day, it doesn't really mean anything. And now, granted, if you've read the books, you know that actually that does have a lot of meaning in a later story. But
Yeah,
in that book, it actually has no meaning at all, other than to simply be, oh, fun fact, he's related to the bad guy. In this movie, it's pretty much the same kind of thing, where you go, okay, plot twist, she's actually related to a chocolatier. Okay, so what? It doesn't like at the end of the day, it's not even clear that she has a claim to the chocolate that this man has established because it sounds like he's established it himself. So like do we care or do we not? Like I don't think we do. Maybe there's some claim there, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really seem to materialize into anything meaningful. So that's it felt like a they threw that in there for the sake of having a revelation of it's supposed to make you as the audience go, "Whoa, surprise!" And that's just not that doesn't do it for me. I shouldn't do it
yeah,
for anyone, frankly.
yeah. No, I was really surprised at how well rated the movie was and how many people were going. It's a great movie. Go watch it. And I was like,
uh,
what on earth are they talking about?
so let me tell you about an experience. I don't even recall. So for you who are watching, me and Saint Jean went to college together, and when we were going to college, Star Wars Episode 9 came out. I don't know if you've watched Star Wars Episode 9, you who are listening, but I'm sure St. Jean has. But I remember watching that with a bunch of the college boys in theaters and walking out, and all of my friends going, "That was an amazing movie." And sitting there going, "Did we just watch the same movie? Like, what happened here?" And of course, after that time, several weeks later, they went, "Oh yeah, that movie is garbage." But in the moment of watching the theaters, right, and seeing this movie play out on the big screen, sometimes you get that impression of, "Oh, this is an amazing movie. It was so cool." Blah blah blah. And my impression is anytime those ratings come out on Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb or whatever, it's right after people saw it in the theaters and it's not legitimate. Don't trust it.
That's totally fair. I can, because coming out of Dune 2, which again,
Hmm.
I saw it in IMAX, and I was like,
Hmm.
whoa! And there's
Yeah.
Hans Zimmer scored this as well, and it's
Hmm.
big and it's beautiful, and like, it's really really well done.
Yeah.
But you come out of it and you get a little distance, a little bit of perspective, and you go, I didn't
Yep.
love that. So yeah, no, I hear where you're coming from. I think you're probably right. Like, a lot of people came out of the movie theater and were like, they end the movie with Timotei singing "Pure Imagination," and
Uh-huh.
it's a pretty good rendition of it. It is
Yeah.
the only good song in that musical, and they didn't write it. So you come out on a
Nice.
high note, and you're like, the movie ends with Timotei and Hugh Grant, and you're like, oh, that was pretty good, actually. And
Uh-huh.
then you think back to, I don't know, 30 seconds before the end of the movie, and you're like, oh, you know what? Kind of garbage.
Yep. Okay. That is perfectly right. Um the Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. I think the Oompa Loompa showing up to save them at the end of when the chocolate is trying to swallow them and
Right, yeah.
suffocate them was supposed to also be a big revelation. I didn't think it was, and because they so heavily foreshadowed that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
throughout the earlier stories that the fact that he showed up was no surprise at all.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people would give credence to some of these things and say, well, oh, it's a kids movie. You're not supposed to bash a kids movie. The kids aren't going to see it coming. And that's where I point to other kids movies that are actually legitimately good.
Yeah.
And you just look at The Lion King, you look at Toy Story, you look at any number of children's movies that have stood the test of time that people have looked at and said, wow, this is a great movie, and say, let's watch it again. Like, I would watch Finding Nemo again.
Hmm.
There's a reason that some of these movies stand the test of time, and it's because that they're legitimately good stories. And
Yeah.
so I don't think that a kids movie should be given any different of a rating simply because it's a kids movie.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I totally agree. And like it's also ridiculous to say, "Oh, a kid's not going to get like it's too complicated for them. They're not going to understand." Monsters Inc. What
Hmm.
a great kids movie. It's
Hmm.
about corporate corruption and kidnapping children. Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
who thought that would be a good idea? And it's a great movie. So
Yeah.
like don't you can't hide behind the fact that it's like it's a kids movie. They can't make it, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it felt like they were trying to pander so hard to a child audience that everything in the movie suffered.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, anyways, I know you mentioned the idea of him learning to read as one of the things that changed within Wonka's character. Did you see anything else that changed within him, and did you think there was a message in the story?
Yeah, I thought that similarly to you, like we have this, especially if you're looking at the Gene Wilder or the previous Wonka movies, where he's a little bit crusty and kind of
Hmm.
get off my lawn, kind of old guy vibes from
Uh-huh.
him. But he starts out as like, oh, he's very excited, and this is all new to him, and he's just starting out. And the movie does a good job of showing how naive he is at
Yeah.
first, right? And I mean, like that is legitimately one of the only reasons I can think of to have that plot line of him like signing away his life to wash dishes. And but like the naivety could have been a good like compelling flaw for him. Like he's
Hmm.
naive, he's not used
Right.
to doing this, he's got to deal with like real businessmen who are corrupt and
Hmm.
politicians and cops, and it's very difficult to do even if you are experienced. And it would have been compelling if he'd learned a little bit and like you said kind of gotten crushed. Like he gets crushed and he comes back and he's calloused. Now he's a little less joyful, a little more crazy, and a little more crusty and less. And that would have been a good place, I think, for them to have really shown his development as a character. Who's to say if it's like good or
Hmm.
bad? But he's a businessman now. He's not just that whimsical chocolatier anymore. And I thought
Right.
that would have been a great storyline. So I was excited for that coming down the line. So I was like, that would be a great plot line for this story. He's so naive and dumb.
Right.
Nope. Just he learns to read. Like that's it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And that is absolutely right. I think that even okay, so let's just buy into their world for a second, right? Let's just assume that Paul was on the right track when he wrote the story and was saying, okay, this whole thing with his mother is the point, right? And you have this Kung Fu Panda experience where he goes, there is no secret ingredient. It's all
Right.
about the friends that you share it with, right?
Right.
Whatever. Um one, I didn't think it was that impactful, but let's just assume that his intent was in the right journey. The journey of the hero is only important if you learn something. And the character you see of Wonka at the beginning and the character you see of Wonka at the end is exactly the same. He doesn't change at all as a person. You don't see, and you know this because the way he gives away chocolate at the beginning is very similar to the way that he gives away his money at the beginning of the movie. And so the difference there is nothing. He doesn't change as a person, he doesn't grow as a person. The only thing he realizes is that he had the answer all along and his mother was there the entire time. He just didn't know it. Right. And so he has this revelation to comfort him in his time. And, yada yada. If you think that that's a great ending or a satisfying ending, good on you. But the it doesn't lend itself to becoming a better person, a man who learned better in the midst of his suffering. And so from that perspective, us as an audience, you can have a message, which I think they clearly do try to have a message about uh, sharing or friendship or something along those lines. So it's clearly trying to have some sort of moral for people to take away. But if the main character doesn't learn that, it's harder for us to learn that and take it away ourselves.
Yeah. No, totally agree. Just zero character growth.
Yeah, yeah, sad. Well, anyways, uh, just leaving with that end note. You talked about it not really leaving you satisfied. You want to go into that just briefly.
Yeah, I it's you you go into this movie kind of expecting there to be some lead up to the original movies.
Hmm.
It is a prequel, and you'd
Right.
think that there would be maybe the actual establishment of a chocolate building empire, and maybe there'd be this actual like, how does he get the Oompa Loompas there? Let's go a little bit more into like
Sure.
where is he making these discoveries, and like there's more interesting work to be done, really, than they
Hmm.
show in the movie, and the ending is just kind of this lackluster, kind of, oh, funny, cute little chocoholic priests and Rowan Atkinson and a giraffe, and
Uh-huh.
it's
Uh-huh.
it's like, oh, the bad guys get their comeuppance, and Noodle
Mhm.
gets, her mom. She's not. It doesn't make it clear if she inherits this fortune or what happens to anybody else. Like everybody
Mhm.
else, all of the other side characters just kind of disappear. Like
Yeah.
nothing really happens with them. It was extremely unsatisfying. They just kind of disappear. Like the random, the guard for the chocolate room, and then like the guard at the
Oh, yeah.
zoo. They had a more
Uh-huh.
satisfying ending than anybody else in that movie.
Yeah.
And it's like we saw each of them for like 20 seconds apiece. Why are they getting a decent ending and everybody else is kind of left going,
That's
oh?
amazing. Oh
It's
my
just
gosh.
I don't. Completely unsatisfying. And then it's, he does
Uh,
pure imagination, which is like he does a good job. Timotei,
uh-huh.
shockingly good singer, I gotta say.
Uh-huh.
I was
Sure.
I was pleasantly surprised. And he and Hugh Grant walk around, and I was like, great, here's the real movie, and it ends, and it's like, great, thanks for that, guys. What the heck would I just watch? So yeah,
So, when it comes to this movie, right, and you're looking at it, clearly you had some big beefs with how it ends, right? I personally was like, I gave it a couple points here because I felt like I was being harsh, and in some ways it does reflect the beginning. So I was like, all right, I'll give you a little bit here, but not full points. But generally, my sentiment is the same as yours. If you were to redo this, what would be your biggest takeaways and say, I would have done this or this or that like that, and maybe two or three big things that stick out in your mind.
I think especially after talking to you about it, I'm liking this idea of coming into the story with a young, naive Wonka and kind of exiting the story with a sadder but wiser Wonka who
Hmm.
is more used to dealing with business people and a little bit more callous to the world, but now a success. So you get
Hmm.
that you have this character arc that actually changes him, and you can do that in a lot of different ways. I think the storyline, the plot, they could have done a good job with it if they'd
Yeah.
removed the entire washroom thing. They cut that
Hmm.
entirely out, put Hugh Grant in for as his sidekick in
Yeah.
Noodle's place for the rest of the movie, and made him kind of the crusty, like, voice of reason in the back of Wonka's head that eventually has to like pick him up out of the dirt at the at the pit of the movie at the bottom
Yeah.
and get him back on the horse, but slightly changed. A little older, a little wiser. I
Yeah.
think that you could have had a very compelling, because I mean we talk about the great movies,
Hmm.
like great kids movies. You've got The Lion King, you've got Toy Story, and you got all of these characters have these carefree, happy lives. And all of these stories are about growing up and how sad it is, but like how that responsibility changes you and makes you
Hmm.
a better person. And there are other things that help you along the way, like friendship in Toy Story, or you know your hot wife or whatever in The Lion King.
Uh-huh.
There's more to it
Yeah.
than that,
Yeah.
but like there's compelling character changes, and Simba has to overcome his own guilt and unsurety in order to claim the kingship, and he
Right.
gets to be a king at the end. It comes
Yeah.
with a lot of responsibility, and he has to face his fears and become a better person. But you don't get that in this movie. Nobody faces anything really. Things just kind of get silly and end up happening the way that the protagonist wants them to.
Hmm.
So I think you've got to really take the character and make something significant happen to them in the movie for me to care.
Hmm.
And I think that you're, again, going back to what you were saying, like, he's not, he needs to be that crazy guy that gets brought down to earth before he can come back up again. And he has to change after he comes back to earth. So
Hmm.
I think I would just remove the entire washroom thing. That thing was ridiculous. And
Uh,
why is it a musical? Stop. So, yeah.
I don't. I also was surprised about the musical part. I'm not sure. I kind of just took it as par for the course, so I don't know if I would eliminate it or not. But I do think that, I mean, the first thing I'd probably do is throw Timothy out and put someone else in there. Who exactly it is, I don't know. Maybe Johnny Depp with CGI to make him younger. Um, I have no idea. But
Ooh, Austin Butler is Wonka. There you go.
I could see it. Nice. Yeah. So I definitely see where you're coming from, though, and I do think there was a lot that they could have improved on. And you know, that's the point of these bad ones. It's not to say, oh, this movie is the epitome of terrible movies, but it's okay. How could we take this and learn so that we could do better if we are to write our own stories or to tell our
Right.
own stories to the people around us?
Yeah. I thought this one was fascinating. The reason I asked you, I was like, hey, you should watch this. I want to
Uh
hear
huh.
what you think, is because I was like, this was not good. It
Hmm.
wasn't the worst movie I've ever seen. Like,
Sure.
I've watched The Room, uh, but it was bad, and I was like, this is like something that I could see people liking, but I don't understand why. I think you have to
Yeah.
not be thinking very hard to like it.
Hmm. And that's exactly the sentiment I would take from that. And I think that's a good place to end it. So
All
that's the
right.
pod. We hope you all enjoyed. As always, we will be back next week with the next episode for you to enjoy. So stay tuned. We'll see you then.